Morning, St. Max. Yesterday we started looking at Uniformity with God's Will by St. Alphonsus, and today I wanted to continue with that. Today we get into the heart of his teaching on uniformity, and it's kind of a hard teaching. It's difficult to wrestle with, but I think that the starting point is Jesus's own words. When Jesus is preaching to his disciples, he's always raising the bar from what they expect him to say. He says, "You've heard it say, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I say, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." He's raising the bar. Even sinners love those who are good to them. What good is that? But God, his goodness rains down on both the good and the evil alike. So as we dive in today, let's have that in our mind. I'll read from the very beginning here of the second section. The essence of perfection is to embrace the will of God in all things, prosperous or adverse. In prosperity, even sinners find it easy to unite themselves to the divine will. But it takes saints to unite themselves to God's will when things go wrong and are painful to self-love. Our conduct in such instances is the measure of our love of God. St. John of Avila says that one blessed be God in times of adversity is more meritorious than 1,000 acts of gratitude in times of prosperity. There we have it. There's the rub. Can, even in these days, I say, blessed be God. God is still in charge. God is doing something. We know that God always brings good out of evil. We know that's what he does. The singular most evil thing that ever took place, the death of Jesus on the cross, he uses for our sanctification. The little mishaps that we do every single day, he can transform those into something good. Something good can always come out of them. So this is kind of where St. Alphonsus is going. He continues, "We must unite ourselves to God's will, not only in things that come to us directly from his hands, such as sickness, desolation, poverty, death of relatives, but likewise in those we suffer from man. For example, contempt, injustice, loss of reputation, loss of temporal goods, and all kinds of persecution." In those instances, it's not that God wills the sin of the person or their bad intention or bad will, but he does will the humiliation or the poverty or whatever the result is for us. That now that this has happened, he has something that he's going to do with that in us. We have to remember that everything happens by the permissive will of God. There's nothing that happens that he goes, oh shoot, I didn't mean for that to happen. How did I allow that? No, Scripture reminds us, I am the Lord, forming the light and creating the darkness, making peace and creating evil. So from God comes the good things and the bad things that we experience, but in different ways. So whereas it's true that when someone offends us unjustly, God doesn't will that injustice that they did. He doesn't want people to be sinning, just as he didn't want Judas to betray. Jesus didn't want Judas to betray him, but it plays into his whole plan, and so that there's good that comes from it. We see that throughout Scripture, the figures in Scripture, especially the Old Testament, they get this, they realize this. The Lord told David he would be the author of those things he would suffer at the hands of Absalom. "I will raise up evils against thee out of thy own house, and I will take thy wives before thy face and give them to thy neighbor." Hence God also told the Jews that as punishment for their sins, he would send the Assyrians to punish them. The Assyrians were the one of the nations in the land that they were taking over, and he said, "No, they're gonna plunder you, they're gonna destroy you, and that's punishment of your own sinfulness." And that's difficult for us to say, and nobody can judge the current situation and say, "Well, this is divine punishment for X." I don't know, but we know that the Lord has allowed it, and the Lord can allow it for our own, for punitive measures. He can allow it to be a sanctification for us, a reparation for our own sinfulness, whatever neglect we have been partaking in. And so as we receive it from the Lord's hands, it's not so important to necessarily figure out why, but okay, now that this is the case, how can I use it? How can I allow the Lord to fashion me from it? A good reflection during these days would be to read the book of Job. If you remember the book of Job, the early chapters, he's a very prosperous man. The Lord is very pleased with him. And then all sorts of bad things start happening to Job. And at one point, his whole property is plundered by the Sabians, and his family all his kids are killed. And what Job says is, the Lord gives and the Lord has taken away. He doesn't say, the Lord gave and the Sabians have taken away. He realizes that this too has come from the Lord. And then he adds, blessed be the name of the Lord. So Alphonsus says, we must not therefore consider the afflictions that come upon us as happening by chance or solely from the malice of men. We should be convinced that what happens by the will of God. Everything that's happening right now is by the will of God. We know that. Faith teaches us that. And we can either reject it and rebel against it and get frustrated by it, or we can say, your will be done, Lord. Whatever you want to do in all of this going on, let it be done in me. How are you calling me to grow through this? How are you calling me to trust you more and more in this? That's what we want. That's the beginning of uniting our will to God's will. We'll pick up more tomorrow. God bless.